Hi there, I'm Dennis Hancock. I'm the president and CEO of Mountain Valley. Over the last week and a half, we've been collecting a bunch of questions on socials. And with me is Sarah, and she's going to run through everything that came in. So Sarah, go for it.
Mountain Valley has so many fantastic verticals to pursue. How do you start to narrow down and focus on which projects receive top priority?
Yeah, it's a great starting question, because one of the things, if you ask people on the team here, I'm fairly relentless about the concept that we can't buy time. We can always raise money, we can always borrow money, we can get more money, but time is our number one currency inside Mountain Valley. And what I would say is how we prioritize is we look at the value of the molecules against the vision of, again, less death, more life. And it starts to, organize itself fairly quickly. And so overall, we, each week look at the priorities, we get stuff in motion, and then we test ourselves. Are we moving fast, and are we staying focused enough to deliver what we committed to?
Which project in your pipeline excites you the most, and why?
Interesting. It's sort of interesting because the first thing that came to mind is our most recent news around our work with the government in Bangladesh. And perhaps that's the most exciting because there's a very near site to commercialization. And I think there's some, really clear paths to revenue. So I would say, just off the cuff, that might be the project I'm most excited about. Not disrespecting the other amazing projects, but just really, really cool, the work that's happening there.
Do you have an update on Coldchain FDA approval?
Yeah, so I just shared that in an interview yesterday. We are admittedly behind on Coldchain. We had some raw material issues, and that's really the first COVID-related delay that I would say was significant on what we thought we were going to do. FDA does, in fact, have our Coldchain samples as we speak, and that update is expected now within a few weeks. So hopefully in early April, we'll have some exciting news to share.
Will you be announcing a licensing deal or product launch for sublingual cannabis products?
Interesting. Cannabis is a lane that the company founded in, candidly, for those that don't know. And as we moved away from that, our goal is actually to move fully back into it, but through our delivery technology. And I can share we are very far along on a licensing deal and partnership in the cannabis space with a couple options that we're working through.
Is there anything in the pipeline that could help with bovine tuberculosis?
Yeah, so that question, I suspect, was just before our press release, because we did announce a solubilization of selamectin. And selamectin, as you recall, it fits into that macrocyclic lactone drug class. So we have Ivermectin, selamectin. Selamectin would be squarely focused on treating bovine tuberculosis. And in addition to the cattle play, there's a direct swine play as well. And for those that don't know, there's quite a relationship between the passing of that disease back and forth in that ecosystem. So we're very excited, and that will be for sure in our testing sites.
With so many lanes already in the pipeline, are there any new lanes that you're excited about adding in the future?
Yeah, I did an interview yesterday too with Mike, and he started to tip a hand that I've talked about before, but it's a terrible topic to be excited about. But when I think of the devastation, and it's the cancer, the C word, and my mother-in-law actually died from cancer a few years back, and seeing that, having front row seats on something that's just so devastating for a family, there's no doubt if we can make a difference on something with that significant. There's been some recent developments that we've read even about Ivermectin and cancer, and we have again been whiteboarding and working through a process where we believe solubilized ivermectin with our Avectisol will have a pretty big play in that, something that you can, for the first time, inject directly in tumors, for example. Working, with bladder cancers and breast cancers are some current starting points that we're anxious to test on. So excited for the business and the ability to make a difference, but acknowledging, what a sad thing it is to have to get excited about.
How is your work with insulin going?
Yeah, so insulin, we haven't talked about insulin for a while. We had done a lot of advanced work on insulin. For those that aren't aware, we originally worked on some rapid dissolve technology that would forego the need for a needle. We've done work with Humulin R, which essentially is a drug you would take maybe a half hour before a meal, and you would sort of forecast a glucose spike. And, the challenge with that, of course, is the precision and timing and, taking it in advance of calories. So we had already done some fairly complicated work in that space, and then shelved it for different reasons as different projects, back to that focus question, as we started working in discussions with different pharma partners and needle and needleless. We have not forgotten about it, and it's squarely back on our planning, as we've now moved into, we've learned a lot too about the temperatures and some of our rapid dissolve technology. So we feel we'll have a really good shot at solving Humulin R in particular with insulin. And if I were to just sort of excite our audience a little bit, I imagine a little pack that flips open with multicolored, rapid dissolve tablets that you can start to forecast, against caloric intake. And I think it'd be fascinating to get away from any needles in that space for both humans and, candidly, animals. People don't realize the amount of diabetes and that in the animal space for companions. And that's another category that we're also focused on.
Which product will be your biggest revenue source this year?
Yeah, revenue, that does come up in a lot of interviews as a startup biotech. I'd say the nearest term for sure is Ivectisol, our solubilized ivermectin. For those that don't know, we're very far along and close to results from a BSL level 4 trial for COVID clearance. We've just announced this significant play into Bangladesh where we're doing husbandry animal trials. We have husbandry animal trials here at home in Canada. So a lot of those projects lead to, various pathways, but all with shorter term views to revenues, I would say.
How does the new study from Columbia on ivermectin affect your work?
So that's an interesting one. That's probably alluding. So there was a study done with a small sample base that people with mild COVID symptoms. So my one temptation is to answer this question with an LOL, because that is probably the most ill-founded study I've personally read since I saw anything on ivermectin. And then coincidentally, we just saw from Dr. Pierre Corey, his group released, again, the mountain of evidence with a global recommendation for the adoption of ivermectin. So it's sort of like saying 3 people had a cough, 2 still had sniffles at the end. We're going to follow the science and the data that is how many lives were saved, how many people would be directly impacted from a death rate, and future respiratory issues. And so that relates back to the work we're doing with our BSL level 4 clearance trial, where we're even introducing the South African variant. And I would say we're following the science. And perhaps the final parting comment on that would be, there was a statement I love from Dr. Pierre Corey that referenced, ivermectin's been dosed 3.8 billion times now in humans. And I think that was something like 168 adverse events a year, which is safer than many vitamins on the market. And so that's kind of my rambling answer for something that again, I would encourage people dig deeper, understand the studies you're reading, understand what they're really saying. And so that study frankly changes nothing. It reminds us to pursue science.
In your interview with Biz News, when asked whether the world would see MVMD's solubilized ivermectin this year, you responded, absolutely. Somewhere like Africa would be much more acceptable to the current safety data. The FDA and work in Canada, they're just more difficult markets, very litigious environments. From a litigious standpoint, what requirements would Mountain Valley need to meet to enter a market like Africa, hypothetically speaking?
Yeah, so I remember that interview. She was a fabulous journalist. So yeah, there's two parts to that. One is like, we do get a lot of pressure about, what are we going to do in Canada? What about the US? We have filed a 505(b)(2) pathway with the FDA for the mountain of safety data that we know exists on ivermectin. And so that is a human use application. And then when I think of the broader, question of what would be needed in a country like Africa, I've gone on record saying it's not that lives are less valuable, so they have shorter circuits to get there. But if people understand the litigious nature of the markets in North America, the gates are just much higher for insurance claims and lawsuits and such. So to answer the question directly, we've started, pathways into, so for example, to answer the Africa thing head on, we'd be working at the highest Ministry of Health level to do a GMP certified Ivectisol that we're producing. And that's, again, part of the Bangladesh announcement. And when we come out of the other end of that with our product, we will now be able to start fast tracking on human trials, and those markets are just much more accessible and much faster. And again, there's a lot of safety data that gets presented and honored. So in the FDA 505(b)(2) pathway, that's a 12 to 15 month process. In a country like Africa with the right political motivation, you could go through that process in less than 90 days, candidly.
When can we expect Mountain Valley to work with governments and hospitals? When will it be okay to use ivermectin as a treatment for COVID-19?
Yeah, that's another interesting question. So the government question, part of it is, I would just think of that question probably came in before our press release this week. But, we're working directly with the government in Bangladesh to answer that exact question. It was probably written from a North American perspective. So if I were to answer it, from the governments here in Canada and the US, we have this statement that MVMD moves faster. I've been in personally probably 6 calls now with various government funding agencies, and candidly, they all start with, offering us half a co-op student, and they don't realize that we're moving at a pace. We're not going to wait a year to go through funding programs. And back to my first question, we can always buy more money, and we can, borrow money, raise money. We can't buy time. So unfortunately here, all our interactions with the governments have been long, laborious, complicated, and political. And so without getting into too much detail, I'm not prepared to waste another minute on pursuing a fake endorsement from government. I'd rather pursue the relationships that will have an immediate impact on health and wellness. And we're going where people want us and where they're pursuing medical need. And that's why some of these third world countries are so appealing. First of all, they're the most disadvantaged, so they have the greatest need. There's economic barriers to their ability to get vaccines, let alone multiple vaccines as variants take off and such. And so it's right in the wheelhouse of our DNA as a company, moving fast, helping the most disadvantaged, going after the pursuit of health and wellness, not profits, knowing that a business that's built from that foundation will, of course, be profitable.
Why does it seem that a lot of forces are working against the use of ivermectin as a COVID treatment?
That's really interesting. I sort of hit on the government side. It's a complicated question. In my next role, I might take it on, head on, but in this one, the best way to answer that is sort of how I answered the last question. When you pursue true difference in human and animal health, you're not led by which drugs will be the most profitable. And when you think of our raw DNA of taking world-class drugs, vaccines, and nutraceuticals and making them more effective, most of the times that's taking drugs that other companies there are leaving behind because they're less profitable and they fall in the generic drug category. So I'm very convicted that the focus that we're doing is for sure disruptive to some that would rather see very expensive vaccines and new therapeutics, not generic therapeutics that you can charge 100 or 200x. There's no doubt that that's in a boardroom somewhere. It's not something I'm invested in or worried about, because we're just going to focus on the things that we can do. But I think that's an interesting way to answer your forces question.
Are there future plans to get the company on bigger exchanges such as the NASDAQ?
Yeah, so we did allude to that in our evolution to move on to the OTC. We're on, traded down in New York now. So that for sure brings liquidity. The holy grail, without a doubt, is to get on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. It brings great liquidity, which is a number one objective always to attract, institutional investors. And we think the awareness and the legitimacy of that type of exchange is for sure on our radar. And then likewise here in Canada, we'll continue to evaluate, are we on the right exchange to give our shareholders the most access and flexibility to trade us.
Is there a reason from the company's point of view why the share has fluctuated so rapidly in the past few weeks?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I did an interview this week as well where I answered that question. In fact, I volunteered that information, ironically. Back in December, we were trading, sub 10 cents. And then we went up to, we've been, as high as $2 and such. And the fluctuation, I think a lot of shareholders get some energy and motivation from, the short-term view. And I can't speak to everyone's individual, financial objectives, but I can just clearly answer from a company perspective. What we're building is focused on long-term shareholder value. The lanes that we're pursuing are each worth, tens of billions of dollars. I've gone on record many times saying we're grossly undervalued from a share price. And my final thing I said in the interview yesterday was, we've built a rocket ship and we're asking people just to get on. Don't worry about picking your seat. Don't worry about the details. Don't worry about the fluctuations, because if you understand it, there's always people that will do short-term things with a stock and, capitalize on short-term opportunity. Those that really understand, that do their diligence, that do their homework on what we've created and what we're working towards, none of that will matter around fluctuations.
What are your personal goals for Mountain Valley MD?
Wow, that's a great question. It's probably related a little bit to the last statement about shareholder value. I know without a doubt my role as the president and CEO is to make sure that we capitalize on the opportunities that are available to us. I've got a proven track record of taking things off a whiteboard and executing and make sure that we do them. And so we've done that well. And all of that satisfies an objective of shareholder value. And without a doubt, my personal belief along the way, being involved with something that can impact animal and human health like this is a very unique opportunity. So from a fulfilling even thinking of my own legacy, to be able to look back and saying, hey, how cool was it to take a company like this, that was just an idea at one point, and bring all the moving pieces together to attract change makers, to attract the right skill and resources and finances around a company. That's, pretty rewarding. And so for sure, my goal is to fulfill what I know we're working on and bring it across the finish line.
Dennis, did you ever imagine that you would be working in the world of biotech with the possibility of saving so many lives, both human and animal?
Yeah, that I can honestly say no. It's an interesting journey. I have 3 children, and interestingly enough, my son's in his last year at the Ted Rogers School of Management, and we talk often about transferable skills and pivoting. And there's certain classes that you're maybe checking the box on, and I coach them all the time to say, hey, there's still something to take from this. Every piece that you get exposed to in life, take what you can from it. You're going to pivot many times. You're going to take things that you've learned and you have no idea where they're gonna maybe all come back together. And so I can answer that honestly saying no, but being a student of learning, always inspiring to do more, an incredible work ethic. I'm not surprised that this door has opened up, but I would never have forecasted that I would be, helping, talented people like Mike and his team bring their ideas out of the lab, if you will, into something real. And so it's been an honor to do it, but honestly, never imagined I would be.